The following program does not offer personal medical advice. Please consult your doctor before using any treatment or product we cover. Welcome to Go to Health Media with your host, Jonathan Marks. We provide a welcoming environment where experts educate you on important health topics, answer your questions, and provide information from which you can benefit in consultation with your doctor. You can visit and subscribe to the show at gotohealthmedia.com. And now, here is Jonathan Marks. Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Jonathan Marks with Go to Health. Today, we're talking about sleep and sleep apnea. Every night, more than 54 million Americans living with obstructive sleep apnea, which is also called OSA, they stop breathing, exposing themselves to serious long-term health risks, which we'll learn more about. When untreated, obstructive sleep apnea can lead to stroke, high blood pressure, and heart disease. Unfortunately, the majority of people with OSA remain undiagnosed. A new national survey conducted by Apnimed revealed that OSA has major personal, social, and mental health effects too. For example, 2/3 of respondents say they're unable to be fully present with loved ones, and nearly 50% say they don't share a bed with their partner. OSA affects personal lives and can also affect work. 92% of the participants say OSA symptoms impacted their work in the last week. The Sleep Health Inquires on Needs and Emotions SHINE survey is the largest psychosocial sleep survey ever conducted, capturing responses from 1,500 Americans living with OSA. With us today to talk about this is Miranda Chappell Farley, who is living with OSA. And she has been on a journey with that for quite a while and will share her journey. We're also going to be talking with Dr. Seema Khosla. She's the medical director of the North Dakota Center for Sleep. She is board certified in internal medicine, pulmonary critical care, and sleep medicine. She's active with the American Academy of Sleep Medicine and has served on numerous committees. She hosts the AASM Talking Sleep podcast, which has had over 340,000 downloads thus far. She was awarded the AASM Excellence in Education Award in 2022. Welcome to the show, Miranda and Dr. Khosla. How are you today?
Good. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Good. So, Miranda, let's talk first about your experience with obstructive sleep apnea. What was your experience? How long have you had it? And what has worked? What didn't work? Tell us your story.
I was diagnosed with obstructive sleep apnea at 21, but my journey is actually much longer than that. I first started experiencing symptoms when I was a kid. I had friends complain during sleepovers about my snoring and also say that it sounded like I stopped breathing during the night. But I was young and I felt fine, so I didn't think anything of it. I had never told my parents and I never told my doctor. It wasn't until I got older in high school and college that I started to experience some of the other symptoms. I had a hard time paying attention in class and remembering information that I was learning despite putting in seemingly so much more effort than my peers. It wasn't until I accidentally fell asleep at the wheel of my car that I thought something was going on.
Yeah.
Before that, I had thought that my sleepiness was just the result of the typical college experience, the result of balancing a double major, having social engagements, and I was actually a sleep research assistant in a sleep lab at the time. So I was also doing overnight sleep studies as a part of research.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. And actually, as part of that assistantship, I developed materials for high school students to come and learn about sleep. And that's where I first actually read about the symptoms of sleep apnea. I immediately recognized them in myself, and actually through that process is how I ended up pursuing a diagnosis.
And then once you got the diagnosis, how long have you been diagnosed and what kind of treatments have you experienced? Have they been helpful?
I was diagnosed at the age of 21, so it's been just a little bit under 10 years since I have treated my sleep apnea. I use my device every night, except for when I go camping, because naturally I cannot use it when I go backpacking or I'm in the wilderness.
Right.
And that has generally worked well for me.
So, doctor, let me ask you now, what is obstructive sleep apnea and how common is it?
It is incredibly common, but so underdiagnosed. We estimate 80% of people who have sleep apnea have not yet been diagnosed. When we look at all of the people that have diabetes and then we add in all the people who have asthma, the burden of sleep apnea is even higher than that. So it's very, very prevalent. When we look at what happens during the night with obstructive sleep apnea, our airway collapses. And so then our oxygen level falls and our carbon dioxide level goes up and our brain wakes up. So imagine having your airway start to close or close almost all the way multiple times every hour, multiple times through the night, every time you sleep.
And did you say that this is coincident with diabetes and other?
It can be, but even if we just look at how many people have it, the number of people that have it is more than all the people with asthma and all the people with diabetes. But you're right. If you have diabetes, you really should be screened for obstructive sleep apnea. And if you have obstructive sleep apnea, you really should be screened for diabetes.
Oh, wow. Interesting. I didn't know that. Fascinating. So if I have obstructive sleep apnea, I guess if I have a partner that my partner might tell me I'm snoring, when should I get checked out?
So it's so funny. We joke about this that often the diagnosis isn't a mystery. It's some bed partner really encouraging their other bed partner to come in and, honey, you're snoring really loud, or you're choking, or you're gasping, or boy, you're a little bit crabby. Maybe there's something wrong with your sleep. And
Yes.
so they come in for a lot of reasons. We see it depending on the different type of person. So there was a lot of younger women that would have migraines in the morning. And the neurologist would send them in for a sleep study, and they were found to have obstructive sleep apnea. So I think it really just behooves us to look, listen to our bed partners. If you don't have a bed partner, there are so many apps and gadgets and watches and wearables that are now really looking into this area where you can record your snoring. And you can use your gadget to see if maybe you are doing something in your sleep that maybe you should go see your doctor about.
And what should clue me in? If I don't have a bed partner, what should clue me in that I should even be thinking about an app?
A lot of the time, people will wake up with a really, really sore throat or a really dry mouth. Or like Miranda talked about, it was just really hard to clear the cobwebs in the morning. Maybe you're a little bit inattentive. In children now, the recommendation is before they get a diagnosis of attention deficit disorder, that we really should look at their sleep.
Oh, really?
Because kids aren't necessarily sleepy, they are hyperactive.
Interesting.
And then when we look at the SHINE survey results and we look at this really incredible emotional burden of obstructive sleep apnea, like Miranda talked about, half of people who have obstructive sleep apnea don't co-sleep with their bed partner because of obstructive sleep apnea.
So I'm surprised about the demographics of this. Miranda mentioned having this. How old were you, Miranda, when you first started recognizing you had a problem? These sleepovers, these kids' sleepovers, how old were you?
I was maybe 10 years old at that time, and I didn't get a diagnosis until I was 21 years old. And unfortunately, that long time to diagnosis is fairly typical.
Wow, amazing. What ages, are there any differences in ages or ethnicity or race in terms of how many people have sleep apnea? What should we know about the demographics of this disease? Is it a disorder?
It's a disorder. Yeah, and kids have sleep apnea. Even little babies that are in the NICU sometimes are on machines to help them breathe.
Wow.
Now, our threshold to treat a little one is much lower than for an adult. So for an adult, we really look for at least 5 breath holding spells an hour with some sort of symptom or other medical problem. So sleepiness or maybe some high blood pressure or something like that. But if you have 15 or more breath holding spells an hour, then those symptoms are less relevant. We look at this and we say, you know what, we really probably should treat this. And so we have different treatment options for adults and children, but there are more and more emerging treatments that are available for our patients. I think one of the things that has really made me think internally once I looked at the results of the SHINE survey is how incredibly high that emotional burden is. And it just broke my heart when I was reading about younger people felt misunderstood and had more anxiety. And that's such an important part of the equation, right? I think we have to be kind to our patients and kind to our colleagues at work. Like Miranda talked about how some people can't be present at work. I think it's really important for us to recognize the importance of sleep, but then also be willing to recognize that if there is a sleep disorder, that we really should go in and have it assessed.
Good. So before we go on, I want to let people know where you can learn more about this is at the osasurvey.com. And OSA stands for Obstructive Sleep Apnea, but you can go to osasurvey.com. So Miranda, now that you've been diagnosed and treated, what's your life now? Is it improved? Is it the same? What kind of relief do you have now under treatment?
My treatment absolutely changed my life. I credit it with giving me my self-motivation and vitality back. I found that after I started treatment, I was way more engaged in my classes. I even found them more interesting. And I actually went on to complete a doctorate, and now I have a PhD and I study sleep full time.
Great. Wow.
So I credit my treatment for helping me through that journey.
Good boy. And you really turned that into a profession. That's wonderful. So what happens, and you can both answer this, what happens if I don't get treated or I don't get diagnosed? So what? So I wake up a few times a night and I'm tired and I'm grouchy. So what other health effects are there to obstructive sleep apnea?
It's funny, you can link obstructive sleep apnea to just about every organ in your body. We had an ophthalmologist that was really good. He had a really good nose for sleep. And he would look at people's eyes and then would send them over for a sleep study. And I have to tell you, every single one of his patients had sleep apnea. And so it really just depends on your lens and how you're looking at it, which is why it's so important to be collaborative in this field, right? To communicate with researchers like Miranda, who's doing all of this really important work, to have clinicians and researchers and industry and tech. Like if we're talking about the survey, they are looking at this problem we've had in the sleep world for a really long time, but they're looking at it through a different lens, where we've always sort of focused on heart disease and high blood pressure and stroke. They looked at the emotional burden of it. And then when I was reading what the respondents had said, it really struck me when people were worried that they may not wake up in the morning because of their sleep apnea. Wow. That one really resonated with me. What about you, Miranda?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a major concern. And you're right. This survey highlights all of these other unseen aspects of sleep apnea beyond just the typical clinical endpoints.
Got it. So how can OSA or obstructive sleep apnea lead to stroke, high blood pressure, and heart disease? What's the connection? All I'm doing is losing a little sleep and stop breathing. So how does it lead to stroke, high blood pressure, and heart disease?
Isn't it funny how casual we can be about stop breathing?
Yeah. Yes.
And so you're right. So then we look at it a little bit more. So when we stop breathing, our oxygen level falls, right? And we know that when you have low oxygen levels, you have all sorts of free radicals that are generated that sort of hang around the body. It creates all this inflammation. And we know that can be really hard on our vessels, and that can lead to plaque buildup and sort of put you at risk of stroke and heart attack and things like that. We know that even if we look at diabetes, if you control the sleep apnea, the sugar is easier to control.
Wow.
If we think about what happens when that airway closes, it kind of becomes fight or flight, doesn't it? Our
Mm-hmm.
body knows something's wrong. And so then you have this adrenaline surge at night.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're having all of these physiological changes at night that shouldn't be happening. And that can take a toll after a while. So that airway closing or almost all the way closing, and the oxygen level falling, and the brain waking up and kind of getting the lighter sleep and not as much of the deeper, sleep, or not as much REM sleep even. All of that can add up. We look at why we sleep. And sometimes it's hard to figure that out unless we look at what happens when we don't sleep, right? I think we're really good at recognizing in our children when they haven't slept well, when they're cranky and they cry all the time, and you're just, you get to the point where like, okay, yep, this kid needs to go to bed. We're not as good at recognizing that in ourselves, where we realize that we really do have to think about what's happening in our sleep. And certainly, if we do have a sleep apnea issue, we really want to save our body from having all of that fight or flight all night and allow our bodies to actually rest and recover. It's important for our mental health. It's important for our memory. It's important for our immune systems.
Wow, those are really some big symptoms that can come about with poor sleep. Miranda, can you tell us a little bit more about the work you're doing now that you have a PhD? What are you doing? Research?
I am a researcher, yes, but I primarily focus on how sleep and other lifestyle factors interact to support memory and brain health. So not quite in the sleep apnea space, though, of course, it is absolutely an interest of mine for personal reasons.
Yes.
I think it's really important that we incorporate these lived experiences into these scientific spaces to really make progress.
Wonderful. Good. So we've been talking with Miranda Chappell Farley. She's living with OSA, but she's also a PhD now in sleep studies. And we're also talking with Dr. Seema Khosla, who's the medical director at the North Dakota Center for Sleep. We've been talking about the importance and the criticalness of understanding if you have sleep apnea, and if you do, how many health effects it can have on your body, on your mind, and on your spirit. Thanks so much for being with us today to let us know about this important condition. It's a disorder. If you want to learn more, there's been this huge national survey you can read about again at osasurvey.com. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having us.
Good.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. And remember, everybody, as we always say at the end of every show, go to health. This has been Jonathan Marks. Take care. We'll see you again next time. Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning in this week to Go to Health Media. Be sure to join Jonathan Marks and another health expert next time. You can also catch the program on your favorite podcast platform. Until our next show, be sure to visit us on the web at gotohealthmedia.com and elevate your life.